Happy day, students. Today we are going to read about Socialism in Europe, Russian Revolution, Class 9 Social Science. Now let us start with the age of social change. The French Revolution, it opened up possibilities of creating a dramatic change in the way in which societies were structured. But however, we have to bear in mind that not everyone in Europe wanted a complete transformation. Some were conservatives, some were radicals, and some were liberals. In this particular slide and the next slide, you will see the basic difference between these three groups: who were radicals, who were liberals, and who were conservatives. If you go for liberals, if you first start off with, liberals wanted a nation which tolerated all religions. They were against the uncontrolled power of dynastic rulers who were the monarchies. They wanted rights for individuals. They argued for an elected parliamentary government subject to laws interpreted by a well trained judiciary that was independent of rulers and officials. If you go take radicals wanted a nation in which government was based on majority of country's population. They disliked the concentration of property in the hands of few, and they did, but not the existence of private property. Now conservatives on the other hand, they resisted change. They did not want any change in the society, but however, after French Revolution, they understood that change is inevitable. Therefore, they said that change can be there in the society, but it has to be a very slow and a gradual process. Okay, they didn't want it to be sudden like what the radicals wanted. Now, if you take industrial society and social change, industrial revolution led to changes in social and economic life. New cities came up, new industrialized regions developed, men and women and children came to factories in search of work. But unfortunately, working hours were long and wages were poor, and sometimes finding job also was very difficult. There was unemployment during the time of low demand for industrial goods. Liberals and radicals made wealth through trade or industrial ventures. According to them, society can be developed if freedom of individuals was ensured, if the poor could labor and those with capital could operate without restraint. If you take in France, Italy, and Germany and Russia, revolutionaries overthrew existing monarchs. Nationalists talked of revolutions to create nations with equal rights. Now let us move on to socialism in Europe and support for socialism. Socialists were against private property and saw it as the root cause of social evils. They had different visions of future. Some believed in cooperatives and some demanded that government must encourage cooperatives. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels added that industrial societies was capitalist. Marx believed that a socialist society would free the workers from capitalism. This would be a communist society. Support for socialism. Socialists formed an organization called the Second International to spread socialist ideas. Workers in Germany and England began forming associations to fight for better living conditions. They set up funds for members in distress, reduction of working hours, and right to vote. Now let us go to the main event, the Russian Revolution. In 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ruled the Russian Empire. If you take the economy and the society during that time, most of the Russian population were agriculturists. Industries were being set up, which was mostly private property of the industrialists. Workers were divided into groups, but they did unite to strike work when they were dissatisfied. Peasants had no respect for nobility. Very unlike the French peasants, Russian peasants were the only peasant community which pooled their land and their commune divided it. The Russian Empire, as I told in 1914, Tsar Nicholas was crowned the Tsar. The Russian Empire included current day Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, parts of Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, stretching to the Pacific and comprised today's Central Asia states as well as Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. Majority of the population was Russian Orthodox Christianity. This is a picture of the Tsar along with his family. Economy and society. At the beginning of 20th century, Russian population was dominated by agriculturists who used to cultivate for the market as well as for their own needs. St. Petersburg and Moscow were prominent industrial areas. Craftsmen undertook much of the production, but large factories existed alongside craft workshops. In 1890s, more factories were set up after and foreign investment in industry increased. Large factories were supervised by the government to ensure minimum wages and limited hours of work. Workers were a divided social group. They were also divided by their skill. Despite divisions, workers united to stop work when they disagreed with the employers. Socialism in Russia. Political parties in Russia were legal before 1914. In 1898, socialists founded the Russian Socialist Democratic Workers' Party, who respected Marx's ideas. Some Russian socialists felt that Russian peasant custom of dividing land periodically made them natural socialists. Throughout the 19th century, socialists were active in the countryside and formed the Socialist Revolutionary Party in 1900. The party was divided over the strategy of organization. According to Vladimir Lenin, in a repressive society like Tsarist Russia, the party should be disciplined and should control the number and quality of its members. A turbulent time. In 1905, Russia was an autocracy, and even at the beginning of 20th century, the Tsar was not subject to parliament. During the revolution of 1905, Russia, along with the Social Democrats and Socialist revolutionaries, worked with peasants and workers to demand a constitution. For Russian workers, bad times started from the year 1904 as prices of essential goods rose and their real wages declined by 20%. Workers went to strike, demanding a reduction in the working days to 8 hours and increase in wages. The procession was attacked by the police and the Cossacks when it reached the Winter Palace. The incident, known as the Bloody Sunday, started a series of events which resulted in the 1905 revolution. The First World War and the Russian Empire. In 1914, war broke out between two European allies, that is Germany, Austria and Turkey, which are the Central Powers, and France, Britain and Russia, later Italy and Romania. This was the First World War. The war became popular, and as it continued, the Tsar refused to consult the main parties in the Duma. Support wore thin. The First War was different on the Eastern Front and on the Western Front. Between 1914 and 1916, Russian army lost badly in Germany and Austria. Russian armies destroyed crops and buildings to prevent the enemy from being able to live off the land. The February Revolution in Petrograd. Petrograd city is divided among its people. On the right bank of river Neva, workers' quarters and factories were located, and on the left bank located fashionable areas such as the Winter Palace and official buildings. Food shortages deeply affected the workers' quarters. On the right bank, a factory was shut down on February 22nd. Women also led the way to strike, and it is called the International Women's Day. The government imposed a curfew as the fashionable quarters and official buildings were surrounded by workers. Duma was suspended on 25th February. The streets thronged with demonstrators raising slogans about bread, wages, better hours and democracy. The government called out the cavalry, but they refused to fight on the demonstrators. Soldiers and striking workers gathered to form a Soviet or council in the same building as the Duma met, and it termed as the Petrograd Soviet. Here you see the effects of the February Revolution. Soviets were set up everywhere, as told before. In individual areas, factories committees were formed. Soldiers committees were also formed as well. The provisional government saw its power declining and Bolsheviks' influence grow. It decided to take stern measures against the spreading discontent. It resisted attempts by workers to run factories and arrested leaders. Peasants and the socialist revolutionary leaders pressed for a redistribution of land. Land committees were formed and peasants seized land between July and September 1917. Let us move on to October Revolution. The conflict between the provisional government and the Bolsheviks grew. On 16th October 1917, Lenin persuaded the Petrograd Soviet and the Bolshevik Party to agree to a socialist seizure of power. To organize the seizure, a military revolutionary committee was appointed by the Soviet under Leon Trotsky. The Military Revolutionary Committee ordered its supporters to seize government officers and arrest ministers. By nightfall, the city was under the committee's control and the ministers have surrendered. At the meeting of the All-Russian Congress of Soviet in Petrograd, the majority approved the Bolshevik action. The effects. Most industries and banks were nationalized by November 1917. Land was declared social property and peasants were allowed to seize the land of the nobility. Use of old aristocratic titles was banned. New uniforms were designed for the army and officials. Russian army became a one-party state. Trade unions were kept under party control. The process of centralized planning was introduced. This led to economic growth. Industrial production increased. An extended schooling system also developed. Collectivization of farms started. What changed after October? Industries and banks were nationalized, which meant that the government took over ownership and management. Land was declared as a social property and peasants were allowed to seize the land of nobility. The Bolshevik Party was renamed. In Jan 1918, the assembly rejected Bolshevik measures and Lenin dismissed the assembly. Despite opposition in March 1918, the Bolsheviks made peace with Germany at Brest-Litovsk. The Bolsheviks participated in the election to the All-Russian Congress of Soviets, which became the parliamentary of the country. Russia became a one-party state. The Civil War. The Russian army broke up and their leaders moved to South Russia and organized troops to fight the Bolsheviks, who were called as the Reds. During 1918 and 1919, the Russian Empire was controlled by the Greens, that is the socialist revolutionaries, and the Whites, who were the pro-Tsarists, backed by French, American, British and Japanese troops. These troops and the Bolsheviks fought a civil war. By January 1920, the Bolsheviks controlled most of the former Russian Empire. In the name of defending socialism, Bolshevik colonists brutally massacred local nationalists. Most non-Russian nationalists were given political autonomy in Soviet Union, the state of Bolshevik created from the Russian Empire in December 1922. Making a socialist society. During the Civil War, industries and banks kept nationalized. Peasants were permitted to cultivate the land. Centralized planning process were introduced. Officials worked on how the economy will work and set targets of 5-year period. During the first two plans, the government fixed all prices to promote industrial growth. Centralized planning led to economic growth, but rapid construction led to poor working condition. Schooling systems developed and arrangements were made by the factory workers and peasants to enter universities. Stalinism and collectivization. This period of the early planned economy led to disaster of collectivization of agriculture. By 1927 and 1928, the towns in Soviet Russia faced an acute problem of grain supplies. Stalin introduced firm emergency measures. In 1928, party members toured the grain producing areas, supervising enforced grain collections and raiding kulaks, the name for well-to-do peasants. After 1917, land has been given over to peasants. From 1929, the party forced all peasants to cultivate in collective farms, which was called the kolkhas. Peasants worked on the land and the kolkhas profits were shared between 1929 and 1931, the number of cattle fell by 1/3. The government of Stalin allowed some independent cultivators but treated such cultivators unsympathetically. The global influence of Russian Revolution and USSR. In many countries, communist parties were formed, like the Communist Party of Great Britain. Non-Russians from outside USSR participated in the Conference of People of the East. The Bolshevik founded Comintern, an international union of pro-Bolshevik socialist parties. Before the outbreak of the Second World War, the USSR had given socialism a global face and world stature. The USSR becomes a great power and its industries and agriculture had developed and the poor were being fed. By the end of 20th century, the international reputation of USSR as a socialist country had eventually declined. With this, we come to the end of the lesson. Read the content that is given in the textbook and practice the map as well. Thank you.